Okay. All right.
I need to hit.
So and so you're now located in Akron. So first off, let me say to all of my Facebook family, I get to talk to April Moore, Dr. April Moore now.
No, I
No?
never finished it. And we could talk about that too.
Oh, okay. Hey, Sean. Then we'll talk about that. And but you guys, so you're catching us in the middle of a conversation that I have already started, and so let's talk about that. So April Moore, why don't you, for my audience's sake, can you just tell us a little bit about who you are? I'm excited about you being in Akron once again, but can you just tell us who you are, and then I'll get into our other conversation.
Absolutely. I am April Moore. I'm a licensed professional clinical counselor with board certification from MBCC, and I have supervision endorsement. I am the owner and therapist of Masterpiece Counseling and Consulting, LLC. In addition to, I work a full-time job. Um, I relocated back to Northeast Ohio after spending 8 years in Columbus. I moved there when family sort of like died off, and the rest of us moved down where my mother was in Columbus. And so I was telling you that after 6 years of being there, I turned around and I had accumulated house, dog, car, anything substantial to say that I was supposed to stay there. And me and my 3 children were there for that period of time, and they call it home to this day. And so by 2022, my last kid graduated, and I turned around and I was like, you know what? I'm going home because this doesn't feel like where I'm supposed to be. Even though when I go there, I visit, it does feel like home. And so I took off, and a U-Haul truck and all of my belongings turned in a leased car and kept going and landed back in Akron. Amazing restart, reset in life. My children all decided to stay in Columbus. Each of them have their own place and own independence. Everything that I had intended to happen happened with them as I was raising them. And so I'm back here, and I'm having the time of my life right now.
Akron is such a great place to be. Akron is just it's since I went to college there, I it still holds a special spot in my heart.
I say that the government did well because they used the money, the federal dollars, to beautify all these areas where, in the urban cities were not as attractive. And so when I came back, the city is just absolutely beautiful. Our intersection at Route 8 and 77, it's just so fascinating because they just completed a more heightened ramp to get on Route 8. And so the city is very beautiful. The one thing that I am less that's less appealing is just activities. It seems like you go to work, you come home, and unless you have your friends or whatever, and I guess at this age now, gray haired, right? At this age now, that kind of connection is really important. Well, I came back and I didn't have that. And so it became, what do I do next? And I drove to Cleveland one day and found Happy's Club. I found reunited with a cousin of mine. And so making my rounds around Cleveland to get to know the city.
Well, I was thinking I need to come to Akron and see what's going on because Akron they still have a thriving, how do I want to call it? African centric community. And I always love being in the midst of that. So now tell me about what new things you have going on in the way of, now you said you're working a full-time job and you're counseling. Tell me about that.
Sure. So when we first met, I was pursuing a doctorate degree.
Hmm.
And I went through all the coursework to complete it. And I call this my greatest success. I failed the comprehensive exam. I could not pass it. And a lot of reasons why is because it was my second career and I spent a lot of time really digging into the work, the clinical work, so that I can develop my acumen in psychotherapy, my skill sets at this advanced level. And I was call it my greatest success because had I had finished, I would not be here now. And I have just so much experience in psychotherapy from working several different places, working under psychiatrists in hospitals. And I do believe that I am the best version of my professional self right now. I don't believe that I would have done that otherwise. And that's a reframe to what would have been considered a failure. And again, it was my greatest success. So
Hmm.
since then, I have developed just a very great understanding, and I call it great because I put in the work for it to be great understanding of psychotherapy and how to communicate and advocate for wellness and our health. Right now in the African American community, we are suffering hand over fist because of our mental health issues. And so my goal was to get really good at this so that I am able to advocate for us, speak to us, and ultimately fight with us about health. And so here I am in Northeast Ohio, really pushing what I call just a health agenda right now.
Hmm. So why do you think we're suffering so much? I mean, what do you think that's
Oh,
from?
yeah, absolutely. So I think because we cannot deny the historical underpinnings of medical and psychiatric history. And so I think that we resist that kind of service until we're in crisis. And so we can be more proactive about our health if, one, we were more educated about what it means to be in therapy, to go to therapy, and even the pharmacology, the medications that comes with it. And it was really important to understand all of that so that I'm able to communicate it in a way to help our people, our culture, to really embrace this thing. One of the things that we do not do well is participate in uh, the research, and for great reasons. We can't deny the history of what was not for us. We were a secondary thought when it came to treatment for mental health and medical treatment. So right now, it's about really getting the information and being able to communicate it in a way that we understand it. And I say I speak three languages, and this is to be so funny, and it's such to me as a personal joke with me and my friends. I speak three languages. I speak what was it? Ratchet, bougie, and classy. Because I back in the day, my grandmother used to say, you have to say it three different ways if someone doesn't get it. So I said, okay, this is how I'm gonna say it. So yeah, that's where I am right now with psychotherapy and health and wellness.
So I kind of sometimes I think that when we start talking about the issues in our community, I don't want to say it as if it's new, because it's not. But the ways that we have, um, I think that some of our problems are um, based on how we deal with them nowadays. I can remember back in the day when we would actually visit one another. We had friendships and relationships, family structures.
Mhm.
As when I was growing up, my mother used to have people that came over for coffee, and they would sit over the table and
Mhm.
they would talk through issues and talk through their problems.
Mhm.
But nowadays, we have people who don't trust and who act as if everybody is their enemy.
Mhm.
And so I wonder if the ways that we make everything clinical works to the disadvantage of people who might otherwise not rise to the level, because everybody doesn't need to be on medication. Some people just need a friend.
Mm,
And so what do you think that I don't know if we can look at COVID and say that it's the problem of COVID, or if this is the problem of the housewives shows, or what is the cause of this. But sometimes I think that when we look at this crisis, it's got to have something different than just, just making it all clinical.
Sure. And what we call that is pathologize. We don't want to pathologize everything. And that is so true. However, there's no denying that biologically, family history, the lack of resources, lack of access to healthcare contributes to what we call pathology, and that's diagnosing and disorders. So yes, you're absolutely right. And it's so funny that you should mention it because I was in one of my groups at work and talking to my patients, and we had talked about the theme of racing thoughts, right? What is this racing thoughts? And it hit me. The reason why our thoughts are racing is because we don't talk about them. And why don't we talk about it? Because no one has friends. You're absolutely dead on there. And so we don't have the ability to release this information that is so trapped in our brains that we can't sleep at night. And that's the other thing that we were going to, is that even when you're sleeping, you're thinking. Why? Because you
Mm-hmm.
have all these thoughts build up and you can't release them.
Mm-hmm.
So let's talk about disorders really quickly and diagnosing.
Mm-hmm.
So I diagnose and treat mental health and addiction issues. And what I explain is that these diagnoses are a collection of symptoms that the person reported. Not that when you come into our offices, we gather the information and say, oh, okay, you have bipolar. No, you've described something to us that fits the mode for a disorder. And so we give that information back to you. We give that label to you, not to weaponize it, but to use it to communicate in a way to help you to say, these are the factors, these are the criteria that met this disorder. And even today, I tell people, I said, if you have a disorder, look at all the symptoms that that disorder contains, and then ask yourself, which one is most problematic for you? And then go through the line, down the line, and figure out what can I do about these to reduce these symptoms? Because you come into us because they're intense. We have something called remission, where these disorders can really not go away, but the symptoms can be reduced. The frequency, the duration of which they last, the
Mm-hmm.
intensity of which they come on can really be reduced if you change, if you fix something in your life. Not us fix you, but you fix you. And
Mm.
so I think conversation gets really twisted because we're on the defense about it. And I'm here to fight for both of us because it's no question. I'll ask someone, what diagnosis have you been given? I say, I don't see it right now. So let's talk about that. And
Mm.
let's see what is there and what isn't there. When it comes to Medicaid, go ahead. Sure.
No, I mean, I think you make a great point there. This personal reporting, and so when I see people, say for instance, or I talk to somebody and they tell me about something that like a diagnosis, or let me put it in a different context. Um, I've come across people who, if they have a drug or alcohol problem, will say, well, I'm an addict, as if that is a bandage that covers everything. And I'm sitting up there saying, well, as long as you're clinging to that label, okay, that's one way of using that. But now it also means that you can do something about it. You're not necessarily a victim of addiction, but rather a conscious participant in it. But we use, sometimes people will use any number of things to kind of say, well, I was raped or I was abused or I was this, in order to not have to, or I just call it bypassing sometimes, so that they can bypass personal responsibility. I don't know if that feels right, but sometimes it seems as though that's what happens. But then I get to push back. I'm sorry, but I get to push back, and people say, but this is chemical. This
Mhm.
is, like I've got something and I can't seem to fix it. What do you think about, do you think that kind of, um do you think that serves the community when they just kind of practice, just do the bypass? I'm just curious.
Yeah,
I don't know if that's truly what it's called, but it's kind of like how I've seen people respond to me.
yeah. It's a complicated conversation to have because when you start to talk to people who life has happened to them, there's that tone that I'm the victim and there's nothing else that I can do about that but be a victim. And that's not true. You can be a survivor and change the language, change the narrative. But you have to have some ownership in it. That's not saying that it was your fault. That's just saying that there has to be a degree of acceptance that something happened to me and this is how it changed my life. One of the things that I do in my groups, because I'm a trauma therapist right now, acting as a trauma therapist at my job, um, what we focus on is what did you become despite what has happened to you. Let's work on let's work what you became. What did it turn you into? Let's talk about that and ask yourself, is there something that you want to change in that narrative? Is there something that you want more to be known about that experience? But let's talk about what you have become because of this. And it's allowing a person to go very inside to look at it from an intrinsic perspective rather than an extrinsic perspective, rather than looking at the external and looking inside yourself. And let's have a conversation about that. Yes, there's many times that people are on a defense because they are helpless at this point. Something happened to them, and there's nothing that they see they can do in the moment. As time passes, there's opportunities to hear something different and to learn something different about that experience. What I encourage people to do, especially when it comes to addiction and some of the most tragic things in life, let's reduce them to a thing that happened to you. That doesn't mean to minimize what has happened to you, but you have in your life story, you have an array of experiences. It's an experience. We want to reduce it so it doesn't totally consume you, because when it consumes you, that's when you have the helplessness and you don't feel like you can even help yourself. But if we can turn this thing into something that is more than just who you are in a moment, there's some more work that can be done there.
That's good. That's good. And I think that is a good question or good inquiry, to make with people. So, yeah, so when you're talking now, let me kind of shift a little bit. You've been talking about doing Sankofa Chronicles.
So I had to change the name because I was looking at, yes, because I was looked it up, right? when I talked to you, it was me brainstorming.
Okay.
Okay. So I've identified the title as Sankofa Knowings and looking more about what our history is in mental health and in health in general is, and bringing it to the forefront. And let's talk about it in real time, and let's talk about it very authentically. Let's have some authentic dialogue about mental health and health in general. And that is using everything in life because it's all relevant. We have a wellness wheel. We have, I was trying to memorize it. It's emotional, it is physical, it's social, it's what else? That's three. It is financial, it is
Spiritual?
spiritual, intellectual. Give me two more.
Physical?
Occupational,
Is it physical or
physical, yes,
yeah?
and occupational, and I think we might have missed one in there, but
Okay.
it's 8 components. And so looking at all those components and let's having real conversation about them. It could be about the culture because it's going to be entertaining as well. I have this dry sense of humor that me and my girlfriends sit on the telephone all hours of the day talking when I'm not at work or they're not over the weekend and having just cracking up. And so making comments about life in general because it's all relevant. We
Mhm.
have some beautiful life stories out here, good, bad, and indifferent.
Mhm.
And let's talk about them so people can feel better about themselves, so we can normalize some of what is going on right now in the world and how it impacts us, how it impacts our families, our culture, our community, and just having real dialogue about it with health being weaved in there along the way.
I was talking this morning on my broadcast and I was sharing about how I have a array of friends, right? And some of my friends, I feel like I have to stay in the kiddie pool with because that's their level of comfort, right?
Absolutely.
But I got the other friends who, if we were on a yacht out in the deep blue, they would dive off with me and swim
Yes.
wherever I wanted to
Yes.
go. And so sometimes what I find is that the people who stay in the kiddie pool might do so because of their ideas about right and wrong, what good people, good girls talk about and do
Mhm.
versus what you really want to get into.
Uh-huh.
Do you find that people who have those, and I'm going to call them shackles for lack of a better thing, but do you think that people who have those, the level of shackles that don't allow them to expand, do you find that they have more mental health issues or less? Or I don't even know if that's how I want to phrase that. But
Sandra, that's good stuff. That is, and it really is a lead into my YouTube channel because it's going to be ratchet, it's going to be bougie, and it's going to be classy, right?
uh-huh.
I think to your point, um, it's hard to tell. It's hard to tell because if you get real good swimming in the kiddie pool, right, you can have some health there. Okay. I think you deny yourself the opportunity to learn more, to see more, to be more when you stay in the kiddie pool, but that's their safe place. And so it's like, who are we to say that that isn't deep enough for you, right? Only they
Mhm.
can tell you that.
Mhm.
What we can do is be ourselves, and they may find some comfort in swimming a little bit deeper based on who we are because we're unapologetic about the conversations we're having. As a matter of fact, we're unapologetic about being a damn adult. How about that? I'm closer to a senior citizen, and I mean, I do have my AARP card. And so I remember my grandmother back in the day, she would say the damnedest of things. And I would say, Grandma, why would you say that? She said, because I'm old and I can say what I want to say. And now I see what she means because I feel more free to say what
Mhm.
I want to say. I have two best friends in the world. We have over 30 years of friendship from college at Ohio University, where I met Roxanne, and then I met Sonia in elementary school here in Akron. And by the
Mhm.
grace of God, he spared our lives and we're still here and still connected. And I apologize publicly because in 2020, I was feeling some kind of way and I cut them off for about 2 years. I said that I had to cut out the white noise because I was in transition and trying to figure out who I am, where I wanted to be, have some resolutions for some things that happened in the past in my own life that they could not accept or didn't understand. And so, again, by the grace of God, I reconnected with them and have apologized profusely about that gap. And again, just thank God for us being there. So to your point, I think that if we can just be ourselves, and that's who they are, we accept them for who they are. We just know we can't talk to them about everything,
Mhm.
right? Because
Mhm.
it may not align with their value system and their moral system, which is okay.
Mhm.
It just goes sometimes for a shallow conversation, but it is what it is.
Mhm. Mhm. Yeah, because sometimes, sometimes people will, jump in the deeper water. Sometimes, by accident, but it's all good. So when I think about this though, I'm kind of curious. I know for me, I get kind of curious as to how this happened. What I see is we, a lot of times, people as they get more successful or, you know, whatever the case may be, they buy bigger houses but want less company,
Mhm.
or they have more time on their hands, but it's like, but you better call before you come over.
Mhm.
There
Mhm.
are so many things that seems like it is, and I'm just focusing in on this because, if it is true that we've got a mental health crisis
Mhm.
in our community, this idea for me of connection and belonging seems to be primary in trying to address, because some people will never go into a therapeutic situation. Some
Sure.
people will never seek out the help. The people who are impacted the most are the people that are closest to them and sitting there saying, I should have seen it or I should have known something. People are truly hurt when it rises to the level of suicide or something else happens that they you feel a level of guilt and failure
Yeah.
when somebody that you know or love falls through the cracks. So I'm just really curious about this, how we can think about connection and belonging and the something that could happen on a community level that catches people in crisis.
So yeah, it's kind of tricky. And it's tricky because you only know what you know, and you only know what people let you know. Can you see the signs? We have signs and flags that we can be educated on. One of my background is in suicide prevention, and I will tell you, it takes a keen eye. And if you're living life side by side with somebody, unless you're sleeping with them, your eye is not that keen. And so there's things that will slip through the cracks on you. And so at that point, it's not really the victim that should go into counseling. Is actually the survivor to be able to deal with the guilt
Mhm.
of not being able to see the signs because the signs weren't there to be seen. So, when you talk about belonging and connection, you can only belong and connect to that's willing to belong and connect to you. You know, there's there's the idea that we will see all this stuff. We cannot. We cannot. What we have to be able to do is create an environment where people want to get the help, that they need to live quality lives. And you're right, there are people who are not willing to go into therapy. And I would encourage them to reconsider what that feels like and look like. It's not what it used to be. There's a degree of anonymity, there's a degree of confidentiality that allows you to process life in a very safe environment with nobody knowing until you tell them. And so it helps people to think that their stuff is going to be protected. And in therapy, what we try to do is to encourage the person to connect and disclose and talk about this so that those who love them are able to support them. Here's the trick to this. In our society right now, trust is an issue. So I may not be able to trust you with my stuff because I don't want to hear it across town. I don't want your advice. I want your ear. And I'm not sure that I can trust that you will be able to be that person for me. So how do we do suicide prevention that way? It's just educate everyone that there are signs and indicators of suicide risks. And I think it's sign T, SIGN hyphen T. If I'm correct on that, I do this stuff every day, so I'm sorry for not having it. But and then there's programs within the community that helps with educating people about suicide prevention. It's just very complicated. It really is.
Mm-hmm. So, it used to be that because I used to give talks about suicide for prevention, and we used to talk about whether or not a person has a plan and the means and all those things. But above and beyond that, because by the time it gets to that level, it seems as though um, you know, there's some stuff there, right? Something to to be in a panic about because now they are actively pursuing something. I've had friends myself who have committed suicide, not close personal friends, but people that I have known. And you don't know what they're dealing with. You don't know if this was a decision they made based on a diagnosis or if it was it. I had one friend who planned his out. I mean, he planned it out. And but above and beyond those type of things, it seems as though we put a lot of stake in this thing called, what you mentioned, is trust. And I don't know, I'm one of those people. I tell folks that I don't know that for me that it's about trusting others, but being able to trust myself to handle whatever it is that comes my way. I could trust you to be you, but I just trust me enough to say that I can handle whatever comes my way. I sometimes think that we need to create a new narrative around these ideas that we invest so much fear in, like this idea of betrayal. I just think that we blow these things up. Who cares? Who cares what you think about me? That's kind of and one of the things I found my friends quoting me about is I tell people I can't think of anything I would rather for you to talk about than me. I know that's kind of a different way or an interesting way of looking at it. But if you can imagine, say for instance, um, our former president, the one that people love to talk about, they can talk about him either negatively or positively. Whatever the fact that people pay attention to him elevates him, right? And sometimes people are so afraid of people talking about them that they don't realize that no matter what it is, that that there is power in just being talked about, of being worthy of being talked about. So for me, what is this? Something happened here, and I'm not exactly sure what happened. But yeah, there is something to be said about being worthy of being talked about. At least that's the way I see it. I'm not understanding what happened here on my screen. Okay, you have any thoughts on that?
I do. I want to go back to the beginnings. And so what we talk about is self-efficacy, and that's our ability to take care of ourselves internally. And so that takes a skill, that takes practice, that takes mastery. And so when you are able to talk about things that are more private or more, in a public forum, or be as open, what you demonstrate is your ability to soothe yourself. You're not looking for that outside of you to soothe you. So whatever you say, you're ready for the feedback. And not everybody is like that. Not everybody have that sense of security. Either they had it and it's gone, or they never had it at all. And most times when we talk about trust, it has to do with our childhood experiences and trust. And so can that evolve over time? Yes, it can, but it has to be something that allows it to evolve into the place where you feel more secure about yourself. So not everyone has that ability to soothe themselves when things go wrong, or when life falls apart. And so they may just close up and not talk about it. I think the other thing too that you mentioned, blowing it up, when you get to a point in your life and you're unapologetic about how you live life, it's easier for you to talk about it. I say that I'm very much an open book. I share my successes and my failures. And for me, that's very cathartic because I get to talk about that in a way that allows me to personally grow over time and open up and leave more room for the rest of life. When we stuff this stuff down, repress it, regress, whatever you want to call it, we tend not to give ourselves space to grow. And so when you're able to talk about your successes and your failures, recognizing that those are universal phenomena, everyone has them. And so it just depends on what it means to you and what you're talking about. So going back to your sense of connection, belonging, trust, it's something that people can evolve into if they see that it's necessary. How does it connect with mental health? Yes, we say belonging and connection is very important in health, and it absolutely is. What we've got to recognize is that there are people who may be connecting and belonging in other spaces and places that we don't know. And that's the reason why you can see them thrive. I want to go back to what you said about suicide as well. When we look at that wellness wheel, and now the 8 are coming to me, it's emotional, environmental, it is financial, physical, socially, spiritually, occupationally, and where's that 8? Yes, and I should have it here, but I don't. But if you look at a person's life and you see some of those areas are deficient, those can be red flags. So somebody who's having financial problems, depending on what degree, right? That could be a deal breaker in life for them. So you are being close to them and close proximity to them in their life, and you say, wow, he's having some financial problems. Okay, maybe I need to watch that. Let's see where he goes with that. Especially if that is the paramount on his value system, right? And with men, it can be, right?
Mm-hmm.
Females, it might be family, it might be relationships, because we're emotional beings. Again, relationships. Just recently, within the last 3 months, since I've been running in and out of Cleveland, that I've heard about two different domestic violence, murder suicides,
Mm.
and or at least one murder suicide, another one was just a murder by a partner. You know, those things are rampant right now all over the world. And so, looking at relationships as that thing that could be cause for suffering. I mean, there's a whole lot in relationships itself that could cause someone to either mentally break down, you know, think about suicide, attempt suicide. So
Mm-hmm.
looking at that wellness will is a great indicator as well when you look at people and take an examine of their life and say where are the deficits, where that person falling short could be a way of catching someone.
Mm. Yeah, and it's really interesting because you bring up a good point. There are things that when it comes down to finances, and you mentioned men in particular, and I know that for a lot of people, when they start to have financial difficulty, because we associate sometimes people associate manhood with their finances, their ability to um provide. It does become something that it impacts not only their mood but also their own sexuality, how they feel about themselves. You see a lot of times that finances can be connected to sexual ability, whether or not people feel potent in the world. So then team that with then relationship problems start because of those types of feelings, and then it can spiral out of control. During this time of year, we see a lot of people who have an idea. A few years back, I had a friend of mine who took out one of those payday loans because he had this idea of what he wanted his family's Christmas to look like. And it's a payday loan, which means that you're getting yourself tied up into something that is by design made to, keep you in or further you into a hole that you are already in, and it exacerbates the situation. So sometimes these things just keep compounding over time. And it just seems like at a certain point people find themselves so far down that they don't know any other way to come back from it. I how do you there was a friend of mine who used to talk about it in terms of how do you stop the bleeding?
Mm-hmm.
How do you stop the bleeding?
Mm-hmm. So let me just say, what I look at is there's the context and then there's the content of life. So the content is the storyline, right? That's, to me, in my opinion, they call it an Aprillism. That's the storyline. That's where a lot of the focus of life is on. But if we get to the big picture, which is the context of life, what he valued was family. And he wanted to make his family happy. He wanted to give his family a good Christmas. That's never wrong. I mean, in his eyes, right? And so how he got there, yes, could it cause him some long-term suffering? Sure, it could. But I think that when we talk about people in their lives, we could look at the storyline and focus on it. But I think if we looked at the big picture and what that man valued, it gives him more than it it reflects more of who he is than what he did. You know, I mean, as I said, I'm an open book through the 20, how old was that last kid? Through the 22 years of, you know, intentionally raising my children, which I say intentional because I never had a relationship within that period of time for a couple of reasons. My value system was making sure that my children were mentally sound, and to bring children into that mix, or to bring a man into that mix who I didn't believe who would stay to the end, to me would be more devastating than not. But my survival techniques included being evicted, included, you know, repossessions, it included moving several times throughout life. If you stay with the storyline, you'll say, damn, why'd you do that? But if you look at the big picture, is that I was creating a future. I would always tell my children when it got really bad, like for instance, holidays are not traditional for us because we didn't have traditional holidays. What we had was family and what was one another. And I hugged and loved on my children during that time, to the point where they're independent now and we have a great relationship. So I can go on and have my own life. To that point, how I conducted life doesn't speak to who I am as a person and what I have become because of it. And that's the reason why I'm able to talk about it, because I
Mhm.
want people to rewrite the narrative of your life, because you can. These are
Mhm.
experiences that have built up your life story, and you have a beautiful life story if you allow it to be. And
Mm.
it comes with successes, it comes with failures. And if you're not resourceful, if you don't have the resources, it comes with some tragedy. It comes with all of that, but that doesn't necessarily have to speak to who you are. It's just what you've done. And can
Yeah.
you grow from that? Absolutely.
That's a
Absolutely.
that's a beautiful way of framing it. I mean, he he um he 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 died not too long after that. So but I remember I remember the panic that he had because he was so adamant about how
Yeah.
he wanted that Christmas to be. I don't know if that was quite his last Christmas, but if it wasn't his last, it was the second to last.
Okay.
And so, yeah, it was, yeah. And the interesting thing is that and not to talk too much about this, but he died suddenly. It was as if yeah, he just fell out, and they were unable to revive him, and he died pretty young. So yeah, it is, but to frame it in that way, if that was one of his last Christmases,
Yes.
it was important. He didn't know that at the time, but it was important to him that he make it a good one. So
Yeah, and just whatever the reason, or even the hurt behind it, hurt financially or whatever, if it build a bigger hole for him to fall into, what he left behind was his children or his family saying, that was a wonderful Christmas. And how beautiful is that? It's life is tricky, man. We can critique it, we can, and I think that's what a lot that contributes to mental health as well. Is stigma, judgment, criticisms. You know, yeah, there's some relevancy and some correlation to the value systems that we have in life. But at the end of the day, are people doing the best that they can with
right.
what they got, right? And
Mhm.
you had mentioned some earlier, we have the opportunity to modify our value systems so that they make sense. And that's the basis of Sokofa knowings, is let's life make sense. How do we help life make sense for us? I mean, there's nothing new about keeping up with the Jones, social media, showing these very extravagant lifestyles. You want that. I even admittedly say being ordinary is difficult for me. My children call me extra. Some of my friends call me extra too. But being ordinary and average, it's taking some work. Okay. I have a degree of contentment right now, but to shrink this personality into accepting that I'm average and ordinary, that takes a lot of work. And but to my mental health, is it necessary? Absolutely. And that's the reason why I'm factoring it into what I want for myself long term, is to be okay with just being okay and not always reaching and searching for these pursuits like I have. I encourage people, what you did in your 20s, you don't do in your 30s. What you did in your 30s, you don't do in your 40s. What you did in your 40s, you don't do in your 50s. Live life differently because you can, not because you have to.
Mhm. Mhm. Hmm. Okay, that's really interesting. I thank you for this, giving us a lot to think about. Yeah, as far as, as far as just reframing and recontextualizing the stories that we're living in. That's good. Um, yeah, it's really hard to the point that you made. I used to always tell people that because and so let me do my little. I do a commercial all the time. I talk about, and folks who listen to me know this, that this time of year is the hardest as we come up to the winter solstice because it's so dark and gloomy here in our neck of the woods. I talk about people taking vitamin D, getting light therapy, or doing something that lifts your mood because those things are so impactful during this time of year. The other thing that I say to people is that you are always enough. You are enough, which is what I kept trying to tell my friend, about his Christmas. You're enough. He's enough. And I just wondered about the extra stress that he was bringing on himself. So when I tell people, just as you are, you're enough. I don't know that people hear it in the way because they've already got it fixed in their mind that they need to be extra. And you don't.
And you ask yourself, at what cost? You ask yourself, at what cost? If it's at the cost of your mental health, then you ask yourself, is it worth it?
Yeah. All right, April Moore, thank you so much. Keep me posted on your YouTube channel as it comes into fruition. I am excited for you because we can't have enough out here of talking about this. And sometimes we look at other people and their stuff just so we can, eavesdrop on somebody else's experience so we can help better understand our own. So this is perfect.
Absolutely. So I did Google the wellness wheel. Can I leave you with those 8
Yes.
components, right? It is mental well-being, social well-being, recreation, finances, career, spirituality, environment, and physical well-being. What you look to do is have balance. And so if you're heavy on any area of that, check into that area and just see what is going on with that, because that can be the thing that can break you.
Okay, so now you said, so is you said career and finance are two separate things?
Yes.
Okay.
So there's different wellness wheels, right? So this other wellness wheel was what we were referring to earlier. It's spirituality, emotional, intellectual, physical, social, environmental, and financial.
Okay.
And there's also occupational.
Okay. Okay. I know there's a lot of people out there that are unfulfilled when it comes down to their occupation. And that's why I was asking. Um Yeah. And so I guess it just depends maybe too on the focus that you give it. So somebody who might have a factory job that doesn't like cultivate them intellectually or anything else, doesn't bring any of those things to them, um, might find the payoff in that it provides for their family in the way that they want it to. I don't know. It was just the,
And then, so along those lines,
Mhm,
go to the other areas of that will and
mhm,
see whether or not you can find fulfillment there that you're void in the area that you want the most. This is what I would tell people as they age. There's a degree of there's an end game to this thing. And so where you are in your career, given your age, consider that, because I hear people who are in their 50s wanting to go and do some, start a whole nother career. I did a mid-career change in my 30s, in my late 30s. And I think for me, that was a perfect time. Could I do a career change now, like that doctorate degree that I would love to have right now, right? Just to say I have it. Is it worth my mental health to pursue that right now? Absolutely not. And
mhm,
so consider those things. What do you want it for and why?
mhm,
Financially, I understand if there's a need for additional monies at this stage in the game, or is there a need to scale back on your expenses so your money can afford you?
mhm,
So consider those things, because your mental health is going to factor in all of that somewhere. You're going to stress your ass out trying to
mhm,
pursue extra stuff just to reach these extra goals
mhm.
that may not be necessary for contentment and satisfaction in life.
Right. So did I hear you say intimacy anywhere on that will?
That falls into relationship, and
Okay.
you keep bringing that up. I think you want to have a whole nother conversation about that.
Oh, I always love to talk about. Let's talk about sex, baby.
Hey,
But
you know,
not saying that intimacy and sex are one and the same, because like I was talking about, some people that I can dive deep with, I feel a level of intimacy, a deeper level of intimacy than I do when you stay in the shallow end. So it's not just sexual stuff. It's just that deepness that I love.
and
Yeah.
you can do that both with your female friends and your male friends. As a matter of fact, at this stage in my life, I will not have shallow relationship. If I cannot be intimate with you, meaning I can't talk about what I need to talk about in life and not fear or mistrust you, then you won't be that close to me.
Mhm,
Because at this stage in life, there's a lot more meaning in what I call living, and I need to be able to go there with you to have those conversations, not only just for the feedback loop. I want to hear what you got to say, and hear what I have to say, and know that it's heard, and be able to give back to that. When it
mhm,
comes to intimacy and my male relationships, the same thing. Let's talk about sex. I, I'm not afraid of that conversation. You
mhm.
know, we all have our value systems that dictate what we may say and how we may feel. But at this point, do what you do. It's your life.
Yeah.
If it ain't for me, it ain't for me.
Yep. 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 Thank you.
Yeah.
All right. I need to let me just cut off the recording.
Okay.
Just